So many businesses come to market, young startups, and try and force themselves in there with clever wordplay and use of channels. But fundamentally, if there isn't a critical problem that needs to be solved, something really deep and intrinsic, it's going to be very difficult to build something, to use your word, enduring.
When people join a company, maybe it's partly worthwhile as a marketer to say, is there life in this product? Is there a product market fit that not only exists today, but it might be durable for the foreseeable future?
How sales and marketing should not play together, and also what does great look like to you?
So we've got this measurement and abundance of data. Goes back to the phrase, just because it can be measured doesn't mean it should, right? There's one metric. Are you meeting your revenue goals? And it's a team effort. Is there a moat, for example, in this company? Do they have a defense? It's so easy to find a competitive analysis construct or Porter's 5 forces if you really want something that goes back and it still seems to work, where you look at all the different forces that are coming into play. Are there legs to this organization? And then apply that against the filter of, do I like the people I get to work with?
As a CMO, every commercial person has typically performance-related pay. What is the metric that a CMO should get paid against?
All of my guests come from different walks of life. I've talked to CEOs with successful exits at billion-dollar companies. I talk to people still on the scale-up journey, all driven by one question: what is the magic ingredient in companies that makes them special? Welcome to the Hive Mind.
My next guest is Irene Sandler, the Chief Marketing Officer of Mechanical Orchard. One of the great things about this is I get a chance to speak to business leaders at various different stages of growth. Mechanical Orchard is really fast growing, but it's a venture-backed company of about 100, 120 people. So we're in a scale-up phase. It's going to be really interesting to hear what Irene's got to say about marketing in 2025. Hi, Irene. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
So for anyone that's not familiar with yourself and also Mechanical Orchard, could you just give us an introduction?
Sure, yeah. Mechanical Orchard is a company, a startup that's using AI to modernize legacy systems. Now, there's a lot of companies trying to do that, so we have a little bit of a twist. We use the behavior of the existing system as kind of the test harness for which to replicate the system in modern code. So we first make an exact replica in the modern code that's idiomatic, easy to understand, easy to maintain, and then people can go off and make changes to it. So it's a behavior-based, incremental, non-disruptive, very low-risk way of modernizing systems that are usually very difficult to modernize.
Okay. Well, I think certainly relevant to financial services, we have more than our fair share of legacy to sort out.
Probably the most.
So from a go-to-market perspective, because that's the focus of our conversations, can you give us a feel for, what that commercial or what that customer engagement looks like for a business like Mechanical Orchard?
Yeah, sure. So what we've done over the first, I guess, year and a half of our existence is really digging into a couple of customers, and we decided to focus on mainframes because kind of source of legacy. I think there's anywhere, depending on whom you ask, 250 to 800 million lines of COBOL. So that's what we honed in on. And in the process of doing this behavioral-based incremental replication process, we've developed a number of tools, some AI-based, some not. And what we've done then over the last 6 to 9 months is pulled them together in a more comprehensive, cohesive platform. So what happens is we go in to a customer, we do what we call a minimally viable modernization, which is we take one particular workload or component or job that sometimes they pick the most difficult one, and in a sandbox environment, we modernize it. We get that into modern code. They can see it through the platform going, job by job into modern code. And once we've done that, then they're like, okay, it works. And so let's tackle the rest of the system, this time moving it all the way into production, not just kind of a semi-production environment. So the customers, though, don't ever really touch the platform necessarily. They can use it to see what's going on. But it's our engineers or the engineers of our kind of deployment partners that would do that.
Okay, so it's quite heavily proprietary, or what's the reason for that? Is it because of the skill level to operate it?
Every system is so different, so it's really a bespoke engagement. So we're automating where we can. What we've done is that we've automated probably the hardest part to automate, which is the replication of the code itself. AI is notoriously non-deterministic, it hallucinates. And so when people have tried to apply AI to a direct kind of, let's translate COBOL to Java, it has generally created not the best code and something that's not quite understandable. Some people call it Jobol. But when you use our approach, the code that comes out, because it is continually tested against the actual data flows of the current system, it works. So the way we do that is patented, but that's kind of the secret there. There's also this concept of a forward deployed engineer. I think it's a term popularized by Palantir, where somebody's able to go into those bespoke systems and really get a good look around and work side by side with the customer to figure out where the greatest need is and what needs to be prioritized first, what needs to be tackled first.
So from a marketing standpoint, who are you building your message for? I mean, it's quite deep tech, isn't it?
Yes.
So are you pitching at a developer level, at the CTO level? Who are you communicating to?
Well, there's several levels, obviously. I think if you take a broad brush look, obviously our target enterprises are the very large ones with this problem. A lot of banks, as you mentioned, a lot of financial institutions, as you mentioned. But there's really, I'd say, 3 layers or 3 groups of people that we would need to talk to, and we are talking to. The executive layer, the CIO, the people in charge, who can range anywhere from the folks on the board that have been alerted of a compliance issue that needs to be resolved. Most times it is the CIO, the person who is in charge of bridging the business requirements with the technology requirements. So that's one group. The second group are the people who are actually tasked with doing things. And they're tasked with the modernization effort. They're tasked with understanding what the old system is. They're tasked with finding that COBOL engineer and getting them out of retirement to provide a little bit more context around the system. And then the third group are the kind of contextual buyer group, as we call it, the procurement people, the security people, even the database people, the ones who have to be contacted and engaged in order to do what we do.
I mean, you talked about AI within your product. AI is everywhere, and AI is in marketing as well. And I think the proliferation of messaging that's written by AI has slightly changed the landscape a little bit. So from your perspective in 2025, what does good B2B technology marketing look like?
AI is an amplifier. It doesn't really come up with the ideas on its own. It can help you hone your ideas, but you've got to give it a prompt by definition. So one of the concerns I actually have with AI in marketing is this massive scaled up proliferation of junk messaging. It can be very frustrating to read. I mean, you'll see it everywhere. But the fundamental issue is not AI. The fundamental issue is good writing, good thinking. So good writing is a product of good thinking. And when it comes to B2B technologies, good thinking has to come from a really deep understanding of the technology and what it means for those groups. So for example, CIOs tend to have a tenure of about 3 or 4 years. So they're looking at this big, hairy mess of a system, and they're thinking to themselves, I have 3 or 4 years to get a win so I can get to my next big job. Are they going to take the shortcut that gives them a temporary win but kicks the can down the road? Probably. That's human nature. Why would they enmesh themselves in something that would actually take 6 years on a good project, good trajectory to get done well when they don't have 6 years or they feel like they don't have 6 years? So the psychology of that CIO level, frankly, the level right below it, is very human. And AI is great at coming out with, hey, here's the value proposition of this approach. But I'm not so sure it's good at discerning the kind of core thinking behind the psychological drivers or inhibitors behind the decision making. That's something that a human has to suss out and figure out and validate. And then you can put it in to ChatGPT and have it pair with you and write something interesting. But you've got to understand that. On the second group, using that as another example, they do care a little bit more about the technology involved. They do care, look, is this going to work or not? How much of a risk is it to my career if I take this on? That's also a concern. But also, is this the right thing for me? Because, hey, I hope to get promoted up to that CIO office, and I don't want to make a mess for myself to clean up in 3 years' time, right? I want to have my 3 years now, and then my 3 years, 4 years as a CIO later. So the incentives are different, and AI is not going to tell you that.
I think you touched on a couple of really interesting points, which is that the individual risk of taking on transformation and I've talked with previous guests that it's not for nothing. Like if you take that on, core banking transformation is a perfect example, and it goes wrong, it costs you your job and maybe your career as well. So that kicking the can down the road is something very, very real.
Yeah, it's very attractive. But then you end up with things like TSB, right? That was from a failed mainframe modernization project. You had the thing that happened with Barclays earlier this year. Those are all because somebody, again, not through any sort of maliciousness, but just from a natural calculus of cost benefit from their perspective, that happened.
If we talk about AI specifically from the perspective of crafting messages,
Yes.
marketing messages, or sales messages, the biggest thing that I think people have been completely blind to is when you personalize something, it's not a logical thing. The reason you personalize them is to make the buyer feel special or connected to, like you've taken the time and effort. And as soon as they figure out that you've been using AI, it completely undermines that, and they feel duped.
Yeah, you're spot on, right? I remember earlier on, I get so much spam email every day. I think my filter catch is about 40 or 50 a day, and then some of it bleeds into my inbox. But one kind of had all these apple emojis because they looked at Mechanical Orchard and figured we had something to do with apples, or that apples would be somehow attractive, right? It's like we have nothing to do with apples. From a product standpoint, and certainly not from a buyer preference standpoint. Yeah, that was just very obviously AI.
Yeah, bit cringe.
Yeah.
You posted recently about LinkedIn eating itself. Now,
Right.
just for anyone that wouldn't have seen that post, can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I may have a bit of a nostalgically rose-tinted view of LinkedIn, but I do remember it as being kind of a network where I would actually learn things, and I still do. There's some folks on there that are really, really engaging and post a lot of very insightful things. But by and large, it seems to have become, a product of the need for advertising dollars. And so as a creator or as a company, for example, when you post a link that is not to another LinkedIn link, the algorithm will reduce your exposure, will reduce your placement. It'll reduce the number of engagements that you can have. So the algorithm is oriented towards promoting more LinkedIn stuff. The algorithm is promoted more towards outrageousness, just like any other social media platform, unfortunately. And so when I say it's eating itself, it's because it's killing the very value that it provided in the service of generating those advertising dollars.
And it was something that's a real serious problem in social media, and I would argue that Facebook's ahead of that curve in terms of its eating itself, because there was that example where they figured out that negative human emotions hold human eyeballs for longer and therefore are more valuable. So now it optimizes content to make you feel angry or anxious or outraged and all of those things, and as opposed to delivering genuine entertainment or in LinkedIn's case, value.
Right, LinkedIn, or even just uplifting positive messages. I mean, sometimes almost like Facebook, like those very personal testimonies of how great life is, which can be uplifting, but those get outsized play, and it's not quite the business network that it really was.
Yeah, definitely. So from a CMO perspective, I mean, we've talked about that in a very human way. It's quite depressing because we're talking about the value that we get as users. But as a CMO, how much would you index your marketing effort on LinkedIn in 2025? And I suppose if you could answer that in two dimensions, from an organic content and a paid advertising perspective.
Sure. There are very few alternatives to LinkedIn, especially for the audience we're trying to reach. As mentioned earlier, that's the CIOs, and then that kind of the technology, whom we call the trusted lieutenants, who are charged with actually executing on a technology strategy. Those are, by and large, audiences that can really only be reached through LinkedIn, possibly through, let's say, Reddit, some of the various threads and others, but not in any sort of aggregated way. So for the lack of any other alternatives, we do index pretty heavily on LinkedIn by definition. Now, what's interesting is when we explored advertising on LinkedIn, and we have a fairly narrow set, well-defined set, I should say, of target audiences, but it's very hard to get down to that level of specificity. So for now, because we're a startup and we need to use our dollars wisely, we have deferred advertising on LinkedIn. And we've been focusing on really trying to develop the content that reaches the specific audiences we're trying to reach.
So focusing more on the message than the distribution channel, or is that right?
Yeah, to be candid, this is a very unusual marketing task. There's probably about 5,000 people in the world that we'd want to talk to about Mechanical Orchard. 5,000 people in the world that matter. So unlike almost any other marketing task, it's not about volume. It's really about a network effect, a referral effect, a trust building exercise. And that is not something that you do easily with paid advertising, which tends to go very wide, very broad. And this is also a much longer term exercise in finding the advocates and the people who've experienced working with Mechanical Orchard to talk more about it.
Is advocacy like a core part of how you sort of execute your strategy?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Advocacy, having expert opinions, people who really know their stuff weigh in. Those are all the marketing motions that we orient towards.
Advocacy is an interesting one. There was a great example for, I use an AI note taker, and I referred people to it, and I didn't know they had an advocacy plan until they started saying, well, you've referred so-and-so, you get another month.
Nice.
And it has a great snowball effect. Obviously, yours is an enterprise technology, and it doesn't overcome having a potentially poor product, but it can certainly amplify, can't it?
Yeah, sure. And advocacy tends to be a little bit more authentic, right? You've either had a good experience with it or a mixed experience, but you're speaking from your experience. You don't really have a massive incentive to completely, say something that's untrue.
One of the things I think I could see AI in my notes running as a theme running through everything. So AI search is becoming a thing as well. And if I'm being really honest, I have actually started using ChatGPT to search more than Google. And I don't think I'm unique in that, but it does call into question some fairly big things like what's the future of the website? Like, what's your take?
First of all, I love AI search. I think as a consumer, as a user, I think it's so much nicer to have kind of more nuance available. It goes deep where I need it to go deep. It can rabbit hole down whatever areas that I've got questions about. So I think AI-based search is, of course, going to be the default moving forward. Kids today in school are not going to know what a search bar really looked like in the past. Now, what does this mean for marketers? You mentioned the website. I don't think websites are going to go away. The LLMs need to pull from something, right? They become the source material. So they become, rather than kind of a first stop, a second, third, fourth stop that gets referred in from the LLMs. So the website's not going to go away. Now, for marketers, what it will have a big difference is SEO. And I think it's great because I've always thought that reducing your company's value prop to a handful of keywords, or in the case of previous companies, pages and pages of spreadsheets of keywords and phrases, is really reductive, and it reduces a lot of the nuance that people do need to be informed of making a good decision. So perhaps one way of saying it is that the SEO is less easy to game, but on the flip side, we're learning now how to game LLMs. People will still game LLM-based search. The recent Claude innards were discussed on LinkedIn, ironically, and mentioned a couple of things about how to make sure that certain things are surfaced by Claude. There's no present knowledge in the LLM about what you're searching for. The other one was that it tends to elevate structured content, stuff that's quotable, rather than stuff that's more maybe paragraph form or research-based. And the third one was called user query fit, which is, I guess, how they associate the query with the usage that you're using it for. That's not clear to me yet, but I'll dig into it when I get a chance.
But I mean, we talked about when you said LinkedIn eating itself, I think that's as a result of people gaming the system and SEO, people game it. And I think people learning to game LLMs is inevitable.
Absolutely. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
one could hope that it's a little tougher because the probabilistic nature of tokens and so forth make it a little more complex to game. But I'm sure an AI will come and give us advice on how to game themselves.
And when there's a commercial incentive, there will always be a way.
Yeah, it's a never-ending escalation.
I was actually with one of my clients the other day, and they had a new inbound lead, and they asked, well, how did you hear about us? And it was from search. And I've heard probably 2 or 3 examples of, people saying, I was surprised to hear that someone found my services through an LLM. And yeah, it'll happen more.
We've had a few prospects that have told us they found us through a prompt. What are some alternatives to current methods for modernizing my mainframe?
Which brings us nicely to another post that you made, or if I'm being really honest, it was a little bit of a rant. It was very satisfying to read, which was around overloaded jargon.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I can't remember, I didn't write down some examples, but it's a massive thing within the industry. And there's almost like a life cycle to it, which is there's a really incisive way of describing something. More people adopt it, and then everyone adopts it, and it becomes ultimately meaningless. But it kind of connects to what we're talking about, because these are the words we use to describe our businesses, and whether it's in SEO or LLMs. But what do you think is a good way for a business to describe themselves?
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? So there needs to be good writing. Good writing comes from good thinking. And good thinking comes from understanding what you're actually selling and the actual value proposition. There was a really excellent book called The Art of Explanation by Roz Atkins. He's a journalist. And it's really eye-opening. He's got some very concrete ways of being able to create something that explains a complex technology or political situation, whatever you have it, in a very clear and concise way. So I don't think it's useful to borrow terminology from other people. I think it's more useful to go back and say, okay, what are we really trying to communicate? What is our technology actually doing? What is the real value proposition? That's hard because the discipline of marketing has gotten so specialized, like everything else, right? We have these tight specializations. We've got like the person who handles programmatic marketing, the person who handles SEO, the person who handles thought leadership, the person who handles analyst relations. It's become so specialized. It's really hard for any person on the marketing team to have, except from possibly the product marketer, to really deeply understand what the product does and what it's good for and how it relates to the desires, needs, fears, concrete problems of a target audience member. So until you have that, you're going to continue needing to borrow banal phrases from various other places because they somehow resemble what you're trying to get across.
One of the things that I've found on lots of websites is that they are overloaded with like tons of the examples of the words that you shared, sort of hyper scalable, radical,
seamless,
this, that seamless,
integration.
this and the other. And you go on the website and you think, I don't have a clue what you actually do. And I've been in fintech for 15 years. So if I'm on another fintech's website and I don't know what they do instantly, it's a symptom of something badly wrong with how they're explaining themselves.
And I'll tell you what, the other potential issue is that there's probably a lot of products that shouldn't exist, right? And in fact, with AI, going back to our theme, it seems, AI is going to obviate a lot of point products. We see, it was even before AI. You think about spell checkers, they used to be discrete products and they got, put into word processing. You think of now AI transcription recording. It used to be a separate product. Now it's all being embedded in Google Meets and Zoom. They've got their own, right? So you have this kind of AI is accelerating what's happened throughout tech through its whole life cycle over the last 40, 50 years, which is that a lot of products get subsumed into platforms. And now you have Meta just announcing that they're going to shop for you. So, you're obviating kind of the e-commerce platforms of today that we know and love. And then Meta becomes your only site. That's their goal, right? Is that Meta becomes your site, only site for everything that you do. So there's that capitalist imperative to kind of own all the avenues of engagement. And so when people join a company, maybe it's partly worthwhile as a marketer to say, is there life in this product? Is there a product market fit that not only exists today, but it might be durable for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, and that was another thing that you mentioned recently. I mean, you described it as product market fit, but I think actually you also described it as founder market fit.
Oh yeah, that wasn't me. That was one of the leads at our Series A investor, a guy named Jake Saper, who writes a lot about product market fit, founder market fit. Some really innovative concepts that he come up with. So yes, there was that idea of the founder market fit as well, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could descend into.
But it's a really interesting subject, I think, for you as a marketer and me as a career salesperson, because so many businesses come to market, young startups, and try and force themselves in there with clever wordplay and use of channels. But fundamentally, if there isn't a critical problem that needs to be solved, something really deep and intrinsic,
yes,
it's going to be very difficult to build something, to use your word, enduring.
Exactly. And so I think it's incumbent on every marketer or any person joining a company, frankly, engineers, to look at the company and do their own due diligence. Is there a moat, for example, in this company? Do they have a defense? It's so easy to find a competitive analysis construct, or I think Porter's 5 forces, if you really want something that goes back, and it still seems to work, where you look at all the different forces that are coming into play. Are there legs to this organization? And then apply that against the filter of, do I like the people I get to work with?
Yeah. But I think it's very easy, and I'm guilty of this earlier in my career, to take the due diligence of others as it's a green light. So if you're in a startup, Sequoia have invested, or another, Lightspeed, or another prestigious venture capital, they're the smart money. It must be a safe business. And actually surrendering your own critical thinking to think, okay, does this have legs? And a perfect example of that is WeWork trying to put themselves forward as a technology company. It's almost like the emperor's clothes. Like, no,
That's a great example.
You're a landlord subject to the same economic forces of that market.
And physics, of physical space. So yeah, absolutely.
So from a marketing standpoint, what do you think you work closely with sales?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some really bad examples of how sales and marketing should not play together? And also, what does great look like to you?
I mean, you bring up a really evergreen topic, sales and marketing. I think something happened early in the evolution of the internet boom, as it were, from the mid-90s. When you look at kind of a lot of pre-internet industries, like let's say retail, for example, you don't have this kind of divide between sales and marketing that I've seen in technology. If you look at how to market an expensive handbag, I could be wrong. I've not been deep into those industries, but I have been adjacent to them, and I don't see the same kind of almost cartoonish mistrust that sometimes gets characterized and made fun of. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One, marketing kind of occurred as an afterthought in a lot of technology. People said, oh, the product will sell itself, right? And whereas other industries, if you look at, let's say, consumer packaged goods, the marketer as a brand manager was a P&L owner. It goes back to quote by Peter Drucker, there's only 2 functions of a business, paraphrasing wildly: innovation and marketing, right? Innovation to come up with something, and marketing to make sure that it fits the market, right? But technology kind of became enamored in the early days of just straight product. The product will sell itself, build it and they will come. And for a while they did. So marketing became kind of the afterthought. It became very coded as female and therefore a little less, important, given the tech bro dominance that has kind of persisted since the 1990s. And it became an afterthought when, in fact, I think some of the best companies, the best tech companies, have succeeded because they've paid attention and incorporated marketing deeply into the ecosystem. What drives me nuts is when there's no alignment between marketing and sales and the go-to-market strategy. So sales wants to blast spray and pray emails, and marketing is saying, look, there's only 5,000 people, for example, we need to reach. That's not going to work, right? We need a advocacy strategy. So obviously not in the case of Mechanical Orchard. We're very well aligned. But the other thing is credit, right? Who gets credit? And so we've got this measurement and abundance of data. Goes back to the phrase, just because it can be measured doesn't mean it should, right? There's one metric. Are you meeting your revenue goals? There's one metric, and it's a team effort. So you can't say, well, this lead came in through the website, so therefore, it's marketing win. No, it could have been one of the salespeople was talking to somebody at a conference, and that person went online and filled out a form. You have no way of knowing. So that type of trying to divvy up credit and say, well, I got this one and you got that one, I find it kind of...
Yeah, I mean, last touch attribution is horrendously flawed, but we seem to really struggle to wean ourselves off that desperate need to measure everything. And one of my favorite examples, and sorry to everyone if you've heard this before, I was years back in a meeting with I think it was CTO of a bank, and he got up and grabbed a pen and drew the slide that he had seen my CEO present, I think it was 4 or 5 years previously at an event. Now, at that time, we might have walked out and said, no, that event was rubbish, zero attribution. But if you ask me, actually, would we have won the deal if that man had not seen the slide 4 years ago? I wouldn't want to place that bet.
Right.
It just takes time.
We're humans. We absorb information from all sorts of sources, sometimes subconsciously. That's one of our superpowers is heuristics and trying to sort things out. And then when we have a problem that we're faced with, we kind of sort through subconsciously, again, all of those things that we went through in the past to say, okay, maybe I have something here in my brain that can help me solve this problem, right? So I'm not going to change the marketing metrics landscape, but I can certainly rant against it.
As a CMO, every commercial person has typically performance-related pay. Mm-hmm. What is the metric that a CMO should get paid against?
I think it's a joint metric again. I think having a common set of criteria that together, if you meet it, here's a problem with individualized metrics. If they come into conflict with somebody else and there's a sense of that it's a zero sum, then you're not going to get the teamwork that you need. Now, if you have an overall metric, this is what we need to accomplish as a company together. Here's where we expect contributions from you, but we're not going to parse it out and say, okay, you did this much, you did that much, right? Then I think that's a better structure. Again, I know I'm talking complete nonsense when it comes to reality, but if I could make my perfect world, that's what it would look like.
And that's all any of us can do. I mean, for marketing, you said this already, revenue needs to be the North Star and everyone contributes to that. I mean, I think terrible examples that I've seen is when marketing get measured on things like MQLs, and suddenly the focus of the department changes to putting out clickbait, because the objective is, can we harvest as many emails as possible, because that's effectively what I call an MQL, and it really toxifies the whole business. But I think there's one thing that you potentially can measure marketing on. I would love to get your opinion on it, which is declared intent leads. Is that not something that a marketing department could...
Declared intent leads. Tell me a little bit more about that.
It's essentially an inbound. When someone comes into the business, they raise their hand and say, I would like to know more about your proposition. I think it's reasonable to suggest that if someone comes inbound, the chances are better than 50% that can be attributed to marketing.
Yes, it could. I'll give you another example, though, real life example, where I couldn't claim credit for probably the biggest amount of inbound we got. So last October, a massive spike in inbound, largest ever, still haven't replicated it yet. And it was because we were mentioned in a very famous podcast called All In. And I hadn't placed that. Nope, I talked to my fellow execs. No one else had placed that. No one had any clue how Chamath mentioned Mechanical Orchard, how he was able to understand what we do and put it in the context of that podcast. So after some digging, we figured it out. But I can't say that's a marketing win. That is not a marketing win. That is a triumph of the network and, a dozen interactions taking place across a dozen people. And that's not alone, a marketing win. So I don't know. I like the idea, and I think you're right. It's the closest thing we would get to it, but it can be very fuzzy nevertheless.
It's not a perfect solution.
Yeah.
One of my favorite sayings is Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure, because people immediately try and game it. As soon as you put a dollar value to someone and say, if you hit that target, you'll get a bonus, their focus becomes on achieving that thing at the expense of everything else.
Right. So maybe we take that saying about, you could measure things, but should you, and add on to it, is it actually going to cause perverse incentives?
Yeah, very much the case. The attention economy. Where are you? It's a bit of a cringe phrase, because I think a lot of the time it talks to kind of influencers and it's more B2C. But actually, the value of attention, given the noise that we've talked about, is more important than ever.
100%.
So where do you stand on organic content in general? And
Yeah, sure. So I first learned about the attention economy, and it wasn't called that, when I read Alfred Wenger, The World After Capital, right? And he talked about, pre-industrially, there's always a scarcity, right? Pre-industrial scarcity was food, and then post-agricultural revolution, it was land. And so, for example, in the UK, we still have vast swaths of land owned by single families. And then after the Industrial Revolution, the scarcity became capital. And now that we've entered kind of the post-industrial economy, in a sense, the scarcity, of course, is attention. And we see this so much, right? It's becoming like that dystopian Minority Report scene where people are calling out your name. Look at this. And they're literally looking for your eyeballs, right? And tracking your eyeballs. So when it comes to getting attention, you mentioned before, outrage gets attention, kind of clever words get attention, but they don't hold attention. So what is it that's going to get attention and hold it? And so for that, you do need organic content. Okay, so what kind of organic content? Not ChatGPT generated generic points of view. You need really unique perspectives. You need stuff that really hones in on the problem set, whether it's kind of overt, like I have a mainframe I need to modernize, or covert, I worry about my career if I don't do this well, right? So you have to go deep to find that organic content. And here's the other thing. You have to make trade-offs. You can't get everyone's attention, nor should you try. And I think that's where a lot of marketers, or maybe more accurately, their management, are saying, we need as broad a reach as possible. But you sacrifice precision, and as a result, you sacrifice attention. So yeah, sure, go blast the airports and plaster them with your ads. But it becomes just wallpaper at some point.
Yeah, the billboard at London City Airport for Deloitte or something. It's very, very high-level branding that very few other businesses can afford to do effectively. Yeah. So my final question is, looking ahead for the next 12 months, what's the big challenge that you need to solve?
For me, the big challenge will be to convert kind of this in-person delight and advocacy to something a little bit more public. We're still dealing with very nervous customers in the sense that these are critical systems. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Core banking. You're not going to touch my core banking, right? And I don't want anything to break and fail. And the beauty of our approach is that it can prevent some of that bad stuff that used to happen from happening. But I think for me, the challenge is to broaden the scope of what the people are saying to us privately and make it a little bit more public.
Very good. Irene, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was really fun.